With the opportunity class or the OC test and the selective high school test being highly sought after with thousands of students applying for it every single year here in New South Wales, it is interesting to know which one is harder to get into and which one is more competitive. If you can only apply for one in a hypothetical situation, or if you missed out on the OC test and you had to go for the selective, which one will give you the best chances of getting in? Is one test harder than the other? Is one test having more applicants than the other? In this video, I will explore this question and more, and I will try to break down what you can do to maximize your chances on whether you want to get into an OC class or a selective high school. To start off with, the opportunity class or the OC class is an exam that students take in New South Wales in the latter half of Year 4. Performance in that exam and the choices in the schools that they want to go into, they're given the opportunity to join that other school in Years 5 and 6. In this class, they typically learn a much faster rate compared to students who don't attend an OC class, where they go over materials of a more advanced difficulty compared to those other students. This has a couple of different advantages where obviously you'll get a little bit more focus and attention compared to if you just went to a regular public school. And also, you might also get a bit of an advantage in the school mark section when you are going for a selective high school, and it might also give you a leg up if you're going for a scholarship exam. As it is a class though, please do note that there's only a limited number of spots available. It will be quite complex compared to if you were to go for a selective high school where it might be the entire grade. So you can kind of imagine if there's only one class available for an OC class, then whole grade would be a couple more options that are available. However, not every school will offer a OC class as well, with only 76 schools in 2023 that offer it, with only 1,830 places available in Year 5. A school may only offer 15 spots, for instance, while another school may offer 60 spots. It depends on the choice that you make and the demand for the students going for it. So if you only go for schools that only have 15 spots available, even though their entry level might be a little bit low, if other students are more ahead of you, then you can't actually go in because they only have a fixed amount of spots. Selective, on the other hand, has two different types. Firstly, there's a partially selective high school and a fully selective high school. No matter which one, generally students who are in the selective stream are also surrounded by like-minded students who are usually more gifted and talented compared to students who do not attend these schools. And ultimately, the end goal of going to selective is that in Year 12, they get a bit of an advantage in terms of the HSC, as that has a big weighting in terms of the internal mark within the school, helping you get into university. As you may have guessed from their names, the partially selective school is kind of similar to OC, where there's only a portion of the grade which is accelerated or selective in the first place. This can range from just one class or having more than one class. With fully selective high schools, on the other hand, this can be the entire grade, where the entire school is selective or accelerated. For selective, there are 4,248 places available in New South Wales for entry in 2023, and the number is across 17 fully selective high schools and 25 partially selective high schools. So now that we know the differences between OC and selective, which one is harder? In this video, I will assume 2 points. The first point is that my definition of harder is that it is more competitive, and my second point is that the test is more difficult. I'm not going to factor in other interpretations like an OC class is harder than selective, as you only get 2 years to socialize compared to other students, because that is also an interpretation of that it's harder. Or maybe it could be selective is harder than OC, as the schoolwork is even more compared to if you were in primary school. That could also be interpreted as harder. But I'll be going over with these 2 points. Those are valid, but today I'll be purely talking about students who are going to try out for one of these schools, and if they can only choose one or the other. So let's start off with harder in terms of entry. If we purely look at the numbers, students and parents may think that there is more than twice the number of spots available in selective, so there's 4,248 compared to OC with only 1,830. So OC is harder. We also have to factor in a couple more variables, such as the number of applicants, because there are more people going for selective or vice versa, from a percentage or a probability point of view, it could make more sense to go for one or the other. With the previous year's data, we're able to create a general acceptance rate for us to see which one's harder in terms of the numbers. So if we look at selective, we know that the number of vacancies is 4,226 and the number of applicants is 15,355 with an acceptance rate of 27.5%. For OC, the number of vacancies is 1,830 while the number of applicants is 12,344. The acceptance rate being 14.8%, and we can find the acceptance rate through a simple formula being the number of vacancies divided by the number of applicants. By using the acceptance rate, we can see that the OC test is harder and more competitive compared to selective as there are more applicants going for a fewer number of spots that are available. It may appear that for selective, more than 1 in 4 students should make it into a selective high school. Although this is not entirely the most accurate picture as well, because the statistics are kind of skewed. As the selective schools, there might be some rural or some schools that are lower in terms of the academic score, so they'll have fewer applicants there, while for the schools that are not in rural areas, that are a little bit more centralized, closer to where people live and are very high in terms of the academic ranking, they might have even more applicants. So it's not an even number of applicants going for these schools, so it's not going to be a 1 in 4 chance. As each applicant can only make 3 choices as well, it is likely that they are not going to be put down the schools that they are not going to be interested in, or maybe put in schools that are going to be too far away. Students and parents need to be tactical with it, which is why I always endorse the CSS framework. If you have not watched that video already, I really implore you to just watch it as soon as you finish this video to give you a bit more context and some strategy. Many students are going for the medium to high selective high schools in terms of their ranking, so they may have an even lower probability than just the 27.5% that we have calculated previously. Alternatively, if they're going for a lower ranked selective high school, there will likely be an even higher probability than just 27.5%. So now that we know in terms of the acceptance rate, OC is harder, does that mean the OC test is harder as well in terms of the format? In my personal opinion, the selective test with its components and accessible topics is more difficult compared to the OC test. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is the additional test, where compared to the OC test, there's now going to be a writing component. If it was like the previous selective format, I would not be pretty fussed on that because the writing test before this current year was kind of easy. It was very straightforward where they could only assess you persuasive and narrative. But now this new test can assess so many more text types compared to in previously, so it's a lot more complex. And you can kind of see this in the 2021 test paper with Chaos on the Beach, or even the sample paper, which is new to the area. Secondly, the topics that could be assessed in general will be a little bit more broader and wider, not just be limited to a certain year's difficulty, such as the OC test. They can't really assess you things that are in year 5 and 6 because you do the test in the middle of year 4. Consequence of this is that there's going to be a wider pool of questions when compared to the OC test, because in year 6, you have a couple more years and a couple more topics that are ultimately introduced to you, leading to it being a little bit more difficult in terms of the preparation. The last reason why I believe the selective test, in terms of the format, is harder than the OC test is really from the psychological aspect of it. Many students who are gifted and talented can perform quite well in this exam and can excel in selective high schools. Although sometimes, because of whatever reason, they are not able to perform their best because of external or unrelated factors, resulting in a lower than expected performance. Sometimes they could be distracted in the exam. Sometimes they would feel even more pressure because unlike OC, where you know that even if you don't make it in, the overall objective is selective. If you don't perform well in the selective test, it becomes increasingly more difficult for you to try to get into a selective school. Yes, you can do the HAS test, but like I've talked about in my HAS video, it's extremely difficult and competitive. Additionally as well, maybe you ate the wrong food in the morning of the exam and you felt sick. So normally if you didn't eat that, you could perform well, but you ate something bad that morning and that resulted in a less than stellar performance. Maybe you did manage to get in, but you didn't get into the school that you intended as well. You could have even gotten a better mark, and this actually happened to one of the students that I taught last year, where they ate 6 pancakes at the start of the selective exam and the morning of. Their parents didn't want them to feel hungry during the exam, so they ended up eating 6 pancakes. They still ended up making into a selective high school, but if they didn't eat that and felt a bit sick during the exam, could they have gotten an even better mark and gotten into an even better school? Potentially. In conclusion, OC is regarded as a pathway to get into a selective high school and not the other way around. People want to get into an OC class because ultimately they can work at a faster rate, but they can get that extra push. So their school marks when they go for a selective high school will be a little bit higher compared to someone who doesn't go to a OC class. This does not mean they'll necessarily get into a selective high school, but they'll just be in a bit more of an ideal environment and get that extra push, I suppose. Therefore, there is a lower acceptance rate for OC compared to a selective high school, and this is reflected in the numbers. Additionally, the more important exam, in my opinion, is the selective high school test, and this is also reflected in the exam format difficulty. Even though we know that one test is harder than the other, so the selective is generally harder than the OC test, the objective remains the same. We want our children and our students to perform the best they can to reach their educational goal, no matter what it may be. If you like this type of video, let me know down in the comments below. If you had a question regards it, write it down and I'll definitely try to respond to every comment. If you haven't liked this video already, click like, subscribe if you haven't. I always try to share some of my insights about the topics of OC, selective, scholarship, everything in between for students to get better in terms of the academics, just because I don't think there's enough conversation about that currently that's really worth people's while. But thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.